So, let me give you a little bit of backstory. If you haven't heard the story of Jacob, who married two sisters in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, Jacob, he saw this beautiful woman named Rachel. He went to her father and said, "Hey, I want to marry your daughter. What can I do to get to marry her?" The father said, "Work for me for 7 years and then you can marry her." He worked for 7 years, and then on the wedding day, during those customs, they had the wedding service, but the bride's face was covered in a veil. And the wedding night happened. They didn't have electricity, of course. Everything's dark. In the morning, he realizes that the father gave him the older sister named Leah for him to marry. And he was very upset. And he said, "Why did you do this? I worked for you for 7 years for your daughter Rachel, and you deceived me and you made me marry Leah." The father was like, "Well, she's the oldest daughter. I need to marry her off." So that's what he did. Then he told him he had to work another 7 years for Rachel, which he did. He worked another 7 years, and then he was able to marry the one that he actually wanted to marry. During this time, he kept working for the father, and he worked for the father another 5 years. He worked for the father, a total amount of years. And during that time, the father would give him sheep for his wages. The father was a little bad-minded. That's what we say in the Caribbean. When somebody, they're not very nice, they have ulterior motives. He was bad-minded. So he would tell Jacob, "Okay, the sheep that are speckled, you can have those sheep," because he's thinking that those sheep aren't going to have a lot of speckled sheep. But God favored Jacob, and actually a lot of the sheep came out speckled. So Jacob actually ended up with more sheep than Laban actually wanted. Anyway, fast forward. God told Jacob, "Leave this land and go back to the land of your ancestors." So he went and told his wives, "Hey, I see your father and your brothers. They're looking at me. They don't like me as much anymore because they realize now I have a lot of sheep and they think that I have more than them." So God said for us to go back to the land where I came from now, which God didn't say now. He just said, "Go back to the land from where you came from." And the daughters agreed. And when Laban went to shear his sheep, they all left. Didn't even tell him they were leaving. They packed up everything. He packed up all his sheep, all his children, and they left. 3 days later, that's when Laban found out that they had left, and he pursued them. And that's where we come now to our day 13 of the 14 days of joy. Hello, friends. It's Makita. I hope you liked that backstory. If you didn't get to listen to it, check it out. But it talks a little bit about the backstory of this verse in Genesis 31 and verse 27. It says, "Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps?" This is Laban talking to Jacob. And right before that, Laban said to Jacob, "You have deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives of war." And God also appeared to Laban, telling him not to harm Jacob, because of course he was angry that he took his daughters, took his grandchildren, and he didn't even get to say goodbye. So God appeared to him and told him, "Don't harm Jacob." So this is what Laban told him. And in verse 31, Jacob said why he ran off. He said, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force." I thought So this is a weird verse for the joy challenge, but I thought it was important because I wanted to bring to light that sometimes we run away from our problems instead of facing it head on. And I believe that a lot of times it's communication. It's just a little communication that we need with one another, a little understanding. Communication is about listening and about talking. Too much times we just want to talk and we don't want to listen to understand. We want to listen so we can respond, so we can clap back, as some people say. But proper communication is about listening to understand, to really hear what the person is saying, and also speaking your feelings. Thus, I feel that Jacob definitely could have gone to Laban and said, "Hey Laban, I see you're acting a little weird with me, but really and truly, you've changed my wages 10 different times about how you were going to pay me as I work for you. And still you're giving me a little attitude. But anyway, God says for me to go back to the land where I come from. So I'm just letting you know that I'm leaving with your daughters and with your grandchildren." They could have had a conversation because now they ran off, right, without telling Laban. Laban followed them, and then that's when they had that conversation. And then they made a covenant between the two of them that neither of their parties would harm the other. And I just believe that before Jacob just picked up and just left like that, they could have had that conversation. He could have gotten to wish them off well with joy and singing, as he said, and things would have been a little better. Thus, I want to just encourage you. Maybe you're trying to run away from a problem. I just want to encourage you, maybe it just takes a little communication. Instead of pointing fingers, complaining about somebody, just say, "I feel this way. I feel really hurt when you do this or when you say this." And just see if you can open up a dialogue right there. Okay? I hope you enjoy this day 13. Join me tomorrow for the last day of the 14 Days of Joy. Have an amazing day. Much love.